Trump says with China he can solve all of the world's problems. Donald Trump says his great chemistry with Chinese President Xi Jinping will lead to the two men solving world problems of great danger. I believe we can solve almost all of them, and probably all of them, Mr. Trump said on Thursday, in his first public comments since arriving in Beijing. He also said previous American administrations, not China, were to blame for the very unfair trade imbalance between China and the U.S. After an official welcome with a military parade on Tiananmen Square and a meeting with Mr. Trump to discuss North Korea and trade, Mr. Xi said the two men had reached many common understandings. Cooperation is the only viable choice, Mr. Xi said in the Great Hall of the People. The statements by the leaders of the world's largest and second largest economies were televised in China, but no media questions were allowed. Mr. Xi said the U.S. and China relationship now stands at a new starting point. Mr. Trump was effusive in his praise of his host, and highlighted their personal relationship, saying a scheduled quick 20-minute dinner the previous evening with Mr. Xi and his wife, Peng Liyuan, at the Forbidden City had lasted 2 hours. Mr. Trump described their official meeting on Thursday morning as excellent, discussing North Korea, and I do believe there is a solution to that as you do. He thanked China for cutting all banking ties with the rogue regime. Mr. Trump was expected to press China to cut an oil pipeline to North Korea, and had a day earlier called for China and Russia to sever all ties with North Korea, but there was no mention in the statements about whether China had shown any interest in measures that went beyond UN Security Council sanctions. Mr. Trump later said he had called on Mr. Xi to work on it hard. This week China posted the second highest monthly trade surplus with the U.S. on record, at $26.6 billion. Mr. Trump faces growing calls from U.S. industry to win greater access to Chinese markets, particularly for technology. U.S. companies also complain that forced intellectual property transfers are routine in foreign joint ventures in China. But in Beijing, Mr. Trump instead blamed previous White House incumbents for the shocking China trade imbalance. It is too bad that past administrations have allowed it to get so far out of kilter. But we'll make it fair and it will be tremendous for both of us, he said. In a separate business ceremony attended by 29 U.S. executives, memoranda of understanding with Chinese companies worth $253.4 billion were announced in industries including vehicle parts, aircraft procurement, coal and shipping. Mr. Trump told the U.S. business audience, "We must immediately address the unfair trade practices as well as barriers to market success." He said intellectual property theft alone was costing U.S. companies $300 million a year. The U.S. is investigating whether it can impose penalties on China on this issue. But Mr. Trump added, "I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage